Let's talk about some of the highlights, and let's not start with Pompeo and Iran, but actually with regional cooperation and how Israel, perhaps for the first time out in the open, is considered as a relevant member of this forum, discussing stability in the region and taking into account normalization, peace agreements with Israel, side by side with issues like tackling Iran.
Exactly right, Ariel. We're talking not only about tackling Iran, but the Palestinian issue has definitely also been raised by Oman, by Jordan, and other regional players. So when we're talking about a security conference, oftentimes you might assume that we're discussing potential weapons deals and things of that nature. Now, that certainly is happening, maybe more behind closed doors. But when it comes to the public addresses that we've heard, it's all been about regional cooperation. Now, at the end of the day, what do most of these countries share? Not all of them, but most of those Middle Eastern states that are well represented there do share a common enemy or common foe, that being Iran. But we also heard more specifically when it comes to Iran, we heard about the nuclear deal. We didn't only hear from Secretary of State Mike Pompeo, but also the top diplomat of Saudi Arabia. The foreign minister was also in attendance, speaking openly to journalists on the sidelines of this meeting and this conference, saying that Riyadh would like to be a part of whatever future arrangement is made with Iran between the United States and other actors. Riyadh wants to be consulted, and they definitely want to have their role to be played there as well, but also saying that they're completely open and willing to engage with the Biden administration. There is no question, Ariel, that the U.S. administration under Donald Trump has been Saudi Arabia's best friend historically, but it seems as though Saudi Arabia is very keen on maintaining that relationship. One of the many different major issues that were discussed thus far, it is expected, as you mentioned, that more major issues will be addressed throughout the day, and some major speeches are also likely to be made as the conference wraps up in just a few hours' time.
Yeah, and Daniel, we're hearing from Saudi Crown Prince through Jordan saying that Israel needs to make some concessions with regards to Palestinians if it wants to strike a deal with Saudi Arabia. This is what Netanyahu has been working towards primarily, right? He would perhaps embrace the initiative brought forward by Saudi Arabia in 2002, but it would be on his own terms and it wouldn't be called the Saudi initiative.
Exactly right. I think that's a very important point you got there at the end there, Ariel, is that this would have a Netanyahu fingerprint on it. Now, he has spoken time and time again, as has U.S. President Donald Trump and all of those different advisors that have been shuffling back and forth between Israel, the United States, Bahrain, the UAE, and other states where there are normalization attempts being made, not least of which is Saudi Arabia, that Israel is soon going to be signing that normalization agreement. But then in between all of that, we see sandwiched in there those stories saying that the king of Saudi Arabia is not necessarily interested in normalization with Israel so long as that Palestinian issue is not resolved, so long as there isn't a two-state solution reached. And there have been other reports circulating regarding Jerusalem being an integral part of that two-state solution. So these are issues that Netanyahu hasn't spoken about very favorably, not at least in the last couple years. And it is possible that we could see a major headline coming. The Israeli Prime Minister is expected to make his way to Manama at the end of the month, by the end of the month. He was supposed to be there this week alongside Ashkenazi. Both of those visits were canceled, according to Bahrain, or due to Bahrain, really. They took responsibility for the cancellation. But at the end of the day, it does seem as though that issue between Israel and the Palestinians is going to continue to be the topic of conversation, especially when it comes to normalization with Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia obviously also taking that issue there to Manama, not only through its own delegates, but also, as you mentioned there, through Jordan, also Oman addressing the issue, Ariel.
Okay. A word about what we're hearing from GANTZ over the weekend, because obviously anything that could do with normalization with the Palestinians in return to a peace agreement with Saudi Arabia would have to be approved politically here, and that's going to be a great challenge for Netanyahu if he indeed reaches that step. In the meantime, we're hearing GANTZ, who on Wednesday voted for dissolving the government, calling the Palestinians to return to the negotiating table on Friday. Explain, where do things stand there? What sort of message is he delivering? Is it on behalf of the Prime Minister, or is it as an alternate prime minister. Let's hear what he had to say. Okay, we'll have it in a minute. So let's hear from you, your take on things.
Yeah, so Ariel, I think you really touched on a few major issues there. First of all, it is as an alternate prime minister, not I don't believe on behalf of Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. This announcement coming right before the weekend here in Israel, attempting to make its way into those evening headlines for those news broadcasts, and definitely does show maybe one step that GANTZ is going to take in campaign season. Yes, that is seeming to be on the horizon here in Israel again as a result of the fact that he did and his blue and white party decided to vote to dissolve the Knesset. So we're likely to see that happen. Now, Ariel, let's take a listen now to what Benny Gantz had to say on the Palestinian issue.
The entire Middle East is changing, with significant regional processes, including normalization agreements that are helping and will aid the region's economic development and stability. I call on you, the Palestinian public, and its leadership, not to be left behind. It is first and foremost in your interest to integrate, return to the negotiating table, and create hope for future generations.
And this appears with subtitles in Arabic and on a very specific outlet to reach the right ears. Correct, Daniel?
Exactly right, Ariel. Now, this outlet is often also used by different sort of Israeli officials, not least of which is the head of the coordinator of government activities in the Palestinian territories. Camila Burukun has used this sort of medium in the past. So they definitely are looking for even the Israeli, Arab Israeli public to hear this, but also around the world. And given the fact we were just discussing what's being held in Manama, this is absolutely a related issue. If we are expected to hear from Gabi Ashkenazi, I'd be curious to hear if he also addresses this as another member of the Blue and White Party, Ariel.